This is Unit 17 of Pimsleur's Arabic 2. An American woman in Damascus is talking to a colleague about his upcoming trip. You'll hear,
وولادكن مسافرين معكن؟
and your children are traveling with you?
اسمع هالمحادثة.
مسافر لإنجلترا الجمعة الجاية ما هيك؟
ايه أنا ومرتي رايحين للندن.
منيح كتير. وولادكن مسافرين معكن؟
لا مو رايحين، بنتنا مو ممكن تروح معنا وابننا ما بده.
ما بده؟ بس ليش؟
هو ورفقاته مسافرين لللاذقية.
In the conversation, you also heard,
معنا.
with us.
اسمع مرة تانية.
مسافر لإنجلترا الجمعة الجاية ما هيك؟
ايه أنا ومرتي رايحين للندن.
منيح كتير. وولادكن مسافرين معكن؟
لا مو رايحين، بنتنا مو ممكن تروح معنا وابننا ما بده.
ما بده؟ بس ليش؟
هو ورفقاته مسافرين لللاذقية.
Now you're at work, but you're leaving to go for a walk. How do you say to a female colleague, how about we go to the Spring Cafe?
شو رأيك نروح لقهوة الربيع؟
Tell her that you want to eat an ice cream.
بدي آكل بوظة.
قول
The weather is very nice today.
الطقس حلو كتير اليوم.
She agrees, saying it's not hot.
مو شوب.
Ask her, would you like to go to the Spring Cafe with me?
بتحبي تروحي لقهوة الربيع معي؟
The ice cream is very good. Ice cream is feminine.
البوظة منيحة كتير.
But before, it was less expensive.
بس قبل كانت أرخص. أرخص.
It's more expensive now.
أغلى هلأ.
Sometimes I go to there with my friends.
أحياناً بروح لهنيك مع رفقاتي.
She says the weather's hot today.
الطقس شوب اليوم.
I want to eat an ice cream too.
بدي آكل بوظة كمان.
Later, tell her I'm going to Canada in January.
رايح لكندا بقانون تاني.
هلأ قول
Before, the trip to Canada was less expensive.
قبل الرحلة لكندا كانت أرخص.
It's very expensive now.
غالي كتير هلأ.
هلأ قول
Now it's more expensive.
هلأ أغلى.
How does she say that there are many things to see there?
في شي كتير تشوفه هنيك.
I like to travel, but now it's more expensive.
بحب السفر بس هلأ أغلى.
How does she ask you when you're traveling to Canada?
إمتى مسافر لكندا؟
Tell her in January or in February.
بقانون تاني أو بشباط.
Now she says, in January the weather's not very nice.
بقانون تاني الطقس مو حلو كتير.
Here's how to say that the weather's bad.
اسمع أعيد.
الطقس عاطل. عاطل. الطقس عاطل.
كيف بتقول بالعربي؟
Bad, referring to the weather.
عاطل.
كيف بتقول إنه الطقس عاطل؟
الطقس عاطل.
قول
I don't like to travel in bad weather.
ما بحب السفر بالطقس العاطل.
To travel, it's very expensive too.
السفر غالي كتير كمان.
The weather's bad sometimes in January.
الطقس عاطل أحيانا بكانون تاني.
هلأ قول
But next week, I'm going on vacation.
بس الجمعة الجاية رايح على الإجازة.
How would she ask you? Are you traveling to England?
مسافر لإنجلترا؟
جاوب
Yes, I'm going to London.
إيه رايح للندن.
Next Friday with my wife.
الجمعة الجاية مع مرتي.
Sometimes the weather's bad.
أحيانا الطقس عاطل.
But England is very beautiful.
بس إنجلترا حلوة كتير. حلوة.
How do you say his children?
ولاده.
Now say their children.
ولادن.
She wants to know if your children are going with you. Here's how to say your children to a man.
اسمع أعيد
ولادك. ولادك. ولادك.
They're traveling.
اسمع أعيد
مسافرين. رين. مسافرين.
She asks, are your children traveling to London with you?
ولادك مسافرين للندن معك؟
Here's how to ask, with us?
اسمع أعيد
معنا. نا.
You use the same ending to say our children. Try to say it.
ولادنا. نا. ولادنا.
قول
Our children.
ولادنا.
Tell her, no, our children aren't traveling with us.
لا ولادنا مو مسافرين معنا.
You tell her about a male friend of yours. Say, his 3 children.
ولاده 3.
Here's how to say, this week, my friend is traveling.
اسمع أعيد
هالجمعة رفيقي مسافر. مسافر.
To Italy with his 3 children.
لإيطاليا مع ولاده 3.
My friend and his wife.
رفيقي ومرته.
and their children are traveling together.
وولادهم مسافرين سوا.
Your colleague says, but your children aren't traveling with you.
بس ولادك مو مسافرين معك.
She asks, how's the weather in Italy now?
كيف الطقس بإيطاليا هلأ؟
She says, I don't like to travel in bad weather.
ما بحب السفر بالطقس العاطل.
Tell her, usually the weather's very nice in Italy.
عادة طقس حلو كتير بإيطاليا.
She says to you, but your children aren't traveling to London with you.
بس ولادك مو مسافرين للندن معك.
We're traveling is the same as they're traveling. Try to say, we're traveling.
مسافرين. نحن مسافرين. مسافرين.
قول
No, my wife and I are traveling. Remember, it's I and my wife.
لا، أنا ومرتي مسافرين. مسافرين.
Without our children.
بلا أولادنا. بلا أولادنا.
Referring to your friend and his wife, say, they are traveling with their children.
مسافرين مع أولادهم.
But our children aren't traveling with us.
بس أولادنا مو مسافرين معنا.
Your colleague says, that's a shame.
يا خسارة.
England is very beautiful at the moment.
إنجلترا حلوة كتير هلأ.
You tell her, our daughter has too much work.
اسمع أعيد
بنتنا عندها شغل زيادة. عندها. بنتنا عندها شغل زيادة.
And our son prefers to stay.
وابننا بفضل يبقى
At home with his friends.
بالبيت مع رفقاته. رفقاته.
His friends are coming from Beirut this week.
رفقاته جايين من بيروت هالجمعة. من بيروت.
They will stay in Damascus
حيبقوا بالشام. حيبقوا
until next Friday.
للجمعة الجاية.
Our daughter's not coming with us.
بنتنا مو جاية معنا.
She has too much work.
عندها شغل زيادة. عندها.
قول
And she wants to see her friends too.
وبدها تشوف رفقاتها كمان. بدها تشوف.
She has too much work.
عندها شغل زيادة.
Your colleague says, that's a shame.
يا خسارة.
Your children aren't traveling with you.
ولادك مو مسافرين معك.
England is very beautiful at the moment.
إنجلترا حلوة كتير هلأ.
There are many things to see there.
في شي كتير تشوفه هنيك. تشوفه.
Our children will stay here.
أولادنا حيبقوا هون.
They're not traveling with us.
مو مسافرين معنا.
Here's how she asks, How old is your son?
اسمع أعيد.
قديش عمر ابنك؟ عمر. قديش عمر ابنك؟
Literally, how much age? She asks you, How old is your son?
قديش عمر ابنك؟
You want to tell her that he's 21 years old. First, here's the word for years.
اسمع أعيد.
سنة. سنة.
Now here's he's 21 years old.
اسمع أعيد.
عمره 21 سنة. عمره. عمره. عمره 21 سنة.
Old is understood. How did you say that he's 21 years old?
عمره 21 سنة.
Now she asks, And your daughter?
وبنتك؟ بنتك؟
How old is your daughter?
قديش عمر بنتك؟ قديش عمر بنتك؟
How do you say 19 years?
19 سنة. 19 سنة.
Now try to tell her. She's 19 years old.
عمرها 19 سنة. عمرها. عمرها 19 سنة.
Referring to your son, say, He's 21 years old.
عمره 21 سنة.
هلأ قول.
Our children will stay here at home.
أولادنا حيبقوا هون بالبيت.
Remind her, the trip to England, it's expensive.
الرحلة لإنجلترا غالية.
Before, it was less expensive.
قبل كانت أرخص. كانت أرخص.
But before, I had too much work.
بس قبل كان عندي شغل زيادة. كان عندي.
She says, I like to travel, but now it's more expensive.
بحب السفر بس هلأ أغلى.
Here's how she says, I can't travel now.
اسمع أعيد.
مو ممكن سافر هلأ. سافر. مو ممكن سافر هلأ.
How does she say, I don't have a car?
ما عندي سيارة. ما عندي سيارة.
Before, I used to have a car.
قبل كان عندي سيارة. كان عندي سيارة.
She says, my son wants a car.
ابني بده سيارة.
Ask her, how old is your son?
قديش عمر ابنك؟ قديش عمر؟
She answers, he's 25 years old.
عمره 25 سنة. عمره.
She says, I have 2 girls too.
عندي بنتين كمان.
How does she say 18, as in 18 years?
18. 18.
She says the older one, she's 18 years old.
الكبيرة عمرها 18 سنة.
And the younger one, she's 12 years old.
والصغيرة عمرها 12 سنة. 12.
Speaking of a man, tell her, next week my friend is traveling
الجمعة الجاية رفيقي مسافر
to Italy with his children.
لإيطاليا مع أولاده.
Referring to a boy, try to say, the older one, he's 12 years old.
الكبير عمره 12 سنة. الكبير.
She says, he's traveling to Italy with his 3 children.
مسافر لإيطاليا مع أولاده 3.
How's the weather in Italy now?
كيف الطقس بإيطاليا هلأ؟ كيف الطقس؟
Sometimes the weather's bad.
أحيانا الطقس عاطل.
قول
But usually the weather's very nice in Italy.
بس عادة الطقس حلو كتير بإيطاليا.
Now you're an American woman talking to a Syrian man at a business conference. Here's how he tells you, I work here in Damascus for Madar.
اسمع أعيد.
بشتغل هون بالشام مع مدار. مدار. مع مدار. اشتغل. بشتغل. بشتغل هون بالشام مع مدار.
مدار
Is his company's name. Now try to tell him that you work for 9-4.
مع 9-4.
بشتغل مع 9-4. مع 9-4. أنا بشتغل مع 9-4.
He asks, how's the weather now?
كيف الطقس هلأ؟
Tell him that the weather's bad.
الطقس عاطل. عاطل.
Someone you know comes over. During introductions, how does your new acquaintance tell him, I work for Madar? here in Damascus.
بشتغل مع مدار هون بالشام.
How does he ask if you are an American?
أنت أمريكية؟ أنت أمريكية؟ جاوب.
Yes, I'm American.
إيه أنا أمريكية.
He says, my son lives in New York.
اسمع أعيد.
ابني ساكن بنيويورك. بنيويورك.
Ask him, how old is your son?
قديش عمر ابنك؟ قديش عمر ابنك؟
He answers, he's 35 years old.
عمره 35 سنة.
He lives there with his 3 children and his wife.
ساكن هنيك مع أولاده 3 ومرته.
My daughter's going to New York next week.
بنتي رايحة لنيويورك الجمعة الجاية.
قول.
Before, it was less expensive.
قبل كانت أرخص.
He adds, but now it's more expensive.
بس هلأ أغلى.
How did he say that he works for Madar?
بشتغل مع مدار.
And how did you tell him that you work for 9-4?
بشتغل مع 9-4. مع 9-4.
Ask him, how old is your daughter?
قديش عمر بنتك؟ قديش عمر بنتك؟
He says, she's 24.
عمره 24. 24.
He says, my daughter, she's 24 years old.
بنتي عمرها 24 سنة.
The trip to New York, it's very expensive now.
الرحلة لنيويورك غالية كتير هلأ.
Before, it was less expensive.
قبل كانت أرخص.
He asks, how's the weather in New York now?
كيف الطقس بنيويورك هلأ؟
Tell him, the weather's nice at the moment.
الطقس حلو هلأ.
قول.
The weather's often bad in February.
الطقس عادة عاطل بشباط.
He says, she's traveling to New York next Friday.
مسافرة لنيويورك الجمعة الجاية.
Tell him again, but I think the weather's nice in New York now.
بس بظن الطقس حلو بنيويورك هلأ.
اسأل.
And how many days will she stay?
وكم يوم حتبقى؟ حتبقى.
How would he answer? She will stay in New York 3 weeks.
حتبقى بنيويورك 3 جمع. 3 جمع.
This is the end of Unit 17 and the end of today's lesson. Pimsleur courses work best when done consecutively and on a daily basis. For best results, please continue with the next unit tomorrow. This has been a presentation of Simon & Schuster Audio. Copyright 2010 by Simon & Schuster, Incorporated. Recording copyright 2010 by Simon & Schuster, Incorporated. All rights reserved. This is Unit 18 of Pimsleur's Arabic 2.
اسمع المحادثة.
You'll hear
الجامعة الأمريكية.
the American University and
وين بتشتغلي؟
where do you work?
اسمع.
هادية، وين بتشتغلي؟
بشتغل مع الجامعة الأمريكية ببيروت.
عن جد؟ أنا بحب بيروت كتير.
أنا كمان. هي بلد بتجنن.
You just heard
بلد بتجنن.
a magnificent city.
اسمع مرة تانية.
هادية، وين بتشتغلي؟
بشتغل مع الجامعة الأمريكية ببيروت.
عن جد؟ أنا بحب بيروت كتير.
أنا كمان. هي بلد بتجنن.
Now you're an American woman attending a conference in Damascus. You're speaking with a Syrian acquaintance. He asks, "How's the weather in New York?"
كيف الطقس بنيويورك؟
It's January, so tell him that the weather's bad now.
الطقس عاطل هلأ. عاطل.
Referring to